right. And we're going. Josh, again, as always. I hope,
What's
as
going on?
always, the second time now. It's good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. I enjoyed
Of
our conversation
course.
last time, and we had to cut it short. So I appreciate you making time.
Always welcome, man. Always welcome. I love what you're doing. For anyone that didn't listen to the first episode, listen to this one. I highly recommend you go back and listen to it. We talk a lot about Josh's story and the classic liberal caucus, what role that is playing inside the overall Libertarian Party right now, and Students for Liberty. It's a great conversation. He's doing a lot of great stuff. Speaking of great stuff you're doing, what have you been up to since the last time we talked?
That's a great question. I have been currently focused on LibertyCon at Students for Liberty. We are currently in the process of a full launch of that conference, and we're planning for the return of LibertyCon to Washington, D.C., February 2nd through 4th of next year. That conference is like the flagship conference SFL does every year. It's the gathering of international liberty lovers from basically every continent. And we all get together. So that's a huge project that my team's working on, and the entire organization is focused on getting off the ground. So that's been a big part of my time. I have a newborn. I think I told you that last time.
Yes,
I've got
you
a
did.
3-month-old baby. So,
Congratulations.
yep. So I'm just making sure that he is happy and healthy and feeling good, and he's starting to like make eye contact and like roll around and vocalize stuff. So it's been really cute. But dealing with that, and then doing work on the side with Project Liberal, which I think we'll talk about, getting that off the ground and rocking and rolling. So a lot of different irons in the fire right now, but enough to make the days go by quick, if you know what I mean. What about you?
Yeah, no, for sure. It's awesome. That's awesome. I'm good, man. I'm actually having a great day. I'm a business development manager in my full-time gig, and that's just involves a lot of softwares, Oracle softwares, Workday, ServiceNow, all over that ERP space. That's
Nice.
where my professional journey has led me from since getting my CPA out of school, and it's going well. Everything's going very well. I'm on a great team and building relationships as I'm supposed to, and all that stuff. And
Good stuff.
now I get to talk to you, and I don't have any babies running around. I actually have a first date later tonight. I'm
Hey,
excited about
congratulations.
that. Thanks. I'm in Chicago these days. I don't know if I was in Chicago last time we talked. I've been here for about 2 months, a little less. So it's my first date inside Chicago.
Nice.
We'll see what happens. But I also have a new niece and nephew. They're about, I want to say, a month old.
Wait,
out in
twins?
Omaha. Twins.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Wow.
there's no twins on our side of the family or my brother's wife, her side of the family. Everyone was shocked. So everything is good over here. I'm excited to be able to talk to you. It was actually, before we get to everything else, let's talk Project Liberal, because this is the good of Twitter, and that is one of my favorite follows on Twitter. It is,
Sure.
It crushes it. The memes, the commentary, it's absolutely one of my favorite, if not my favorite, political follow.
I appreciate that, man. That's awesome. And we're basically only 90 days into this project. So Project Liberal is something started by my colleague Jonathan Casey and I. We obviously have a team of people, as you can imagine, because the amount of content we're putting out. This is done by a lot of different content creators that we have in our network. We have probably a good solid half dozen people that are volunteers for this, that are the core of what makes this thing tick. But in a nutshell, the concept behind Project Liberal is we wanted to start it as effective. It's an experiment. We see a lot of discord within the libertarian movement, a lot of apathy, a lot of infighting. We see the word libertarian as being maligned to not mean what it actually historically has meant. And we see in the United States massive polarization from a political perspective, people on the extreme left and extreme right. You being involved in Forward, I know you and I have very much shared issues with the way that is functioning. And so what we see as an opportunity is to assert and kind of redefine what liberalism is. Because I mean, if you go to anywhere except for the United States, liberalism has a pretty standard definition. And a lot of the times this is tied back to classical liberalism. These are, ideas of it's a minarchist ideology. So the idea of limited government, free trade, freedom of speech, freedom of movement. And it's focused on, individual prosperity through individual liberty, and the idea that we should trust one another, and the government should really just be there to protect us from force and fraud and coercion, and be really get out of the way as much as possible. So we see an opportunity for classical liberal ideas to really blow up and become a movement for the center. And so liberalism in every other country, there's usually strong liberal traditions. In the United States, that word has been tainted and maligned, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But we know classical liberalism, those ideas are what led the United States to prosperity, and that can continue to lead the United States to further prosperity in this century. And so we wanted to create this project. And when I say an experiment, it was effectively created to, we're asserting we want to reclaim what that word means. And we want to see if we can build a political movement around that is willing to go do political activism, eventually run candidates, and do all the work related to the tactics of politics, but organize them around these ideas that are liberalism. And so it's a really new project. And when we're taking it very seriously. So when I say an experiment, I don't mean like, we're just kind of seeing what's going to happen. And then it might be, we're actually taking this very seriously. And we have a plan for the next couple of years, but we did not expect it to blow up as quickly as it did. We haven't been in soft launch mode for the last 90 days. Like, we've just been kind of putting content out there to experiment and see what works, what doesn't, and what energizes people. And I think we're at something like 12 million people in the last 30 days. I think something like that in reach. And so we've been just absolutely shocked at how much this is picked up. And so we're moving forward to our full launch later in the year, which we tend to have some sort of an activism component and some sort of an organizing component rather than just being a social media content creation space. But in a nutshell, that's the idea. We want to build a political movement around liberalism in the classical sense and reclaim that word.
I love it. That's actually, I think it's a big theme of what you're doing overall. Also, it's a big theme. It's becoming a big theme of my podcast. I've loved this journey. I think this episode, when I post it, would be 46 or 47, somewhere around there.
Yep.
And I've been able to have these incredible guests like yourself on. And something that's becoming a theme is the definition of words being tainted or changed. It's really interesting. It's been a really interesting part of my journey here, is that something I've seen is that, like, political figures, whether inside or outside of the political system, they do a really good job of taking a word and making it mean something that it doesn't, and coercing, in a sense, or tricking the public. And I actually, right now, one of my series, I say series, but it will be something that I do as long as I do this podcast, just like I have libertarians and political people on. I'm doing a series on Israel, Palestine, the different perspectives. I'm Jewish, and if you didn't know by the name, but so, like, obviously a lot of that's going to be talking about, like, Jewish culture, but a lot of it's going to be talking about Palestinian culture and Arabic culture and all those things. And I see it all the time within that context. There's words like Nakba and Zionist and just everything in it, that nothing actually, when you say those words, everyone's thinking 20 different things. The one I always come back to is actually feminist. I think the word feminist has been, I think that one's a great example of, hey, here you say this and you're going to think 20 different things if you ask 15 different people. And what I see you doing, all that to say this, what I see you doing within your caucus, within the Project Liberal, within Students for Liberty, is you're fighting the fight to take back the word liberal and libertarian. Because truly my concern when I look at your party, or the Libertarian Party, is kind of who has control of that party now.
Yeah.
And what they're doing, like the New Hampshire Twitter account. What they're doing is, like, when people hear libertarian now, and when I have these conversations offline to my friends' despair, and I bring up libertarian, everyone thinks like MAGA and like this right, far right, would have everyone describe that,
and not not unreasonably so, right?
Yeah, I mean, what they're seeing,
sure.
it's wild. But when I hear that, I think the things you say, and I see you fighting this good fight, and it looks like one of the most difficult things that you can do. And I see Jews trying to do it with the word Zionist. If you don't know what that word means by definition, and this when I say by definition, the same way feminist means you want equal rights between the sexes.
Yeah.
Zionist is just somebody that wants a Jewish state with Jewish self-determination. That's it. It's nothing to do with borders. It's nothing. There's so much other stuff going on around this conflict. And something that's happened is 5 years ago, over 95% of Jews identified as Zionists. And that was the case for a long time. Now it's dropped. I can't remember the exact number, but it's definitely well under 80. And when people hear that word, they think something different. They
Yeah, that
think
means a lot of charged things.
it means a lot of charged things. Yeah. And it's a fight I see happening inside my one community here, this Jewish community, which is like, how the hell do we win this word back? Like, how the hell do we get it back to what it was? Can you even do it? And it's a fight that is a very similar fight I see you doing, not with just the word liberal and libertarian, but with the party itself. Mm-hmm. It's just a very interesting thing to see and to learn from. So, that's a lot there, but keep fighting that good fight, man.
Yeah, no, it's difficult. I mean, it absolutely difficult. I think a lot of politics does boil down to that. It's defining your movement, especially when you're, I mean, like, for example, think about the MAG movement in 2016, that really redefined what conservatism was. And so in a lot of ways, politics is really fighting over these definitions and kind of fighting who gets to define the term. And I am very concerned about the long-term ramifications of the word libertarian. Since we've spoke, things have escalated in a real way. I mean, we had a Libertarian Party affiliate in New Hampshire posting the 14 words and other outright neo-Nazi slogans on official channels, and they were not disaffiliated or even condemned by the National Party.
Whoa.
That alone has made me decide to completely disassociate from the National Party. The only involvement that I have in this point with the Libertarian Party is through the caucus. I'm still giving them money to try to help them with that fight. But I mean, as you said, you at some point that word becomes tarnished, and therein lies the reason why we're trying to build a movement of people in the middle that have those classical liberal values and that, want to fight for those. That's kind of the idea of, let's redefine the term liberal and build a larger movement of people in the center.
What would be the end goal of that? Is there a party that you'd want to align to, maybe build? What are you building towards there?
There are a lot of conversations happening internally on whether we want to do that. There is a decision. There have been conversations about potentially starting a party around liberalism. I think that is a 50-year game and not a 5-year game. So that's a real big decision if that happens. And there are things that I can't really get into around the nuances of what that would mean. That would there are conditions that have to be in place for that to actually work, because without millions of dollars backing you to start, you're not going to be. Start a party is just not going to go anywhere. You have to have the right conditions to launch a party, and so those conditions have to be in place before I think it's worth doing. But in the meantime, there is activism that you could do in tandem with the Democrats and the Republicans and with independent candidates at the local level, at the state level. And I do know that phase 2, right? Phase 1 for us right now is putting content out there, building a movement, finding our audience, bringing those people into our CRM so that we can reach out to them and talk to them. Phase 2 is going to be then applying that to real world politics in a way that can actually push the needle when we kind of find where we can actually make an impact. And I've done a bit of this through state level lobbying in the past. I used to run a 501c4 that did lobbying very similar to this. It was a bit of a different context, but I know we can do it. I just want to make sure that we're not wasting people's time. So our goal is building audience right now, finding our voice, and then we're going to take that and focus that in the right place. And eventually it could turn into a party or a bigger movement. It remains to be seen what happens in the Libertarian Party. 1 year they're going to have their convention, and if something radical doesn't happen, then we're talking about, there's some serious changes that have to be made. So we'll see what happens. I'm not sure.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. Speaking of, okay, I don't want this to take up the whole time because knowing myself, I could do this. So if we ever want to move on at any point, let me know. However, you mentioned the 14-word thing.
Yeah.
That brings me to somebody I want to talk about. Unfortunately, it's not the context I want to bring up in at first. I want to bring this up later, but since we already mentioned that, I'm a big RFK fan. I wouldn't say I think he's the savior or anything like that, but I really like the message he's putting out. I've listened to him. I listened to him on Reasons, which I've actually found through you. I listened to him on that podcast. I listened to him on Bill Maher, Rogan, the All In podcast. I've listened to him like all over the place, and I really like what he has to say. I personally find him to be truthful, whether he's interpreting the data or wrongly or not. And there's many cases where I'm just like, I don't know if that's correct, but the truth is I don't know. And I do say is that but he is citing Berkeley studies like that. The Berkeley study, I think, was the frog one. He's citing John Hopkins. He's citing Princeton. He's citing CDC studies, FDA studies. Like, he is citing real things that when I look them up, like,
I don't
this is
disagree with that.
real.
Yep.
So the interpretations, I'm fine to say, yeah, he could be getting those wrong. He might have no idea what he's talking about. I don't know.
Yeah.
However, I want your overall opinion on him before we get into the 1488 thing. But the 1488 thing obviously struck my chord, and I was like, oh, I have to learn about this. And one of the COVID topics, I was like, oh, okay, I have to look into this. So I want to get into those. But before I do, what are your opinions on RFK? Because I know you don't like the guy. I want to hear why. I want to hear where this is coming from.
So I don't know in the overall, I actually wanted to ask you a similar question because I think that you and I are coming at it from a different political perspective. So for me, there's a whole different thing. Like, my criticisms might be positives for you. I don't know. Right.
Oh, interesting.
So my major criticism with him, if we're going to just simply look on the face of what he stands for as a candidate, I simply don't support his politics. So like, he's anti-nuclear power. He supports the Green New Deal. He said, I think it was on the Reason podcast, that he wants to make radical changes to the way that the CDC and the FDA work. And one of the goals that he had laid out was, I want to make it harder for people to bring drugs to market. I think he's peddled a lot of misinformation about the Euromaidan situation in Ukraine. And I've seen him make some things that have really led me to believe that he's bending the truth around Ukraine to help. I mean, I don't think he may not be malicious to try to help the Russians, but I think that he's definitely inherently propagating those false narratives that I hear from the Russian space. And he's also called to like jail people for speech and other things that, for me, as like a libertarian and classical liberal, I look at that stuff and I go, I just, like, as a candidate, I can't support it. So if you were somebody on the left and you were, say, very passionate about climate change, or like that in and of itself isn't a big issue that he fights for. But even in that, there's so much nuance to unpack about why, I don't think his climate change solution is a real climate change solution. But I guess what I'm saying is, if you're coming from the left, he might be a little bit more palatable than maybe if you're coming from the center.
That makes sense.
Come from. So I think those are the big things. And then the other thing that I think that we'll probably touch on, which you alluded to a minute ago, was his just an overall commentary around vaccines, around pharma, and all that. Like, the one thing that I think he does, and this is where I get a lot of heat online, is I see that he will take things like studies, as you mentioned, things that have truthful basis, and he will extrapolate out and make really large, broad claims that are outside of the scope of either the studies in question or the evidence that he's referencing. So I'm trying to think of an example, but like, this wasn't the Reason thing. I remember he mentioned that polio is coming back because of the vaccine, whereas he was referencing some very niche situation where there was a vaccine that was using a live virus in New York City, and apparently it made its way through sewage into a community that was made up of Hasidic Jews who were not vaccinated, and there are a handful of them that caught polio, and he used that to extrapolate out, saying, "Oh, vaccines are bringing back disease." When if you look at the last 100 years, polio actually was on track to be eradicated by a vaccine, and the vaccine dropped the polio rates by 99%. So like, yeah, sure, you can look at a point example, and you and I could look at that and say, okay, there is obviously something there. I don't know, that vaccine that caused that is no longer in use, but like, something happened there. But that saying that means that vaccines are the cause of these illnesses and they're causing chronic problems, like that extrapolation is where I start thinking of him as more of somebody who's using disinformation to try to achieve an agenda. So that's my 10,000 foot view on it. I'm curious.
I like it.
I'm actually curious as to what draws you to him.
Yes. Yeah. So I like it. 10,000 foot view. Let's start moving down a little bit. Sure. What draws me to him, I guess my 10,000 foot view, maybe a little bit closer to the ground, but it's less so his policy. For example, something I completely disagree on is his nuclear policy.
Yeah.
Which his nuclear stance, the reason when he gets pushed on that, he says he'll be fine with nuclear once the insurance companies are fine with it. He's like, they're the ones that like they won't do it. Like they just say no, that's a red line for them. And he looks at that. That's what he always says. And okay, I get it. I mean that's fair, that's valid, but I still think in my research of nuclear, I even had the Uranium Insider on Twitter, and he's on YouTube. I had him on here, and I like nuclear. I think the insurance companies have it wrong. I'm just some guy with a podcast, but I disagree there. Um, I I don't know the exact reference you were making to the Russia-Ukraine. I don't know the exact one you were making, but his overall Russia-Ukraine stance,
Yeah.
I fully support. I actually, um, I apologize for doing the whole Israel Jew thing connection, but this one actually will apply. I promise. Like, I want people to stop dying the same way in Israel and in Palestine. I want people to stop dying. I want peace. And the truth is, so it's really weird. It's a really weird thing. And this is going to be a bit of a rabbit hole. I'll try to do it quickly. Palestinians in the pro-Palestine side, I wouldn't say Palestinians. I'd say the pro-Palestine arguments outside of Palestine. So the Americans that like it, they would constantly compare Ukraine to Palestine, and even Mohammed al-Kurd, who is a Palestinian, one of their activists, he'll do that. But the truth is, it's a part of the whole conflict. When you go back to 48, even before that, it's the Arab world against the Jewish world, and Golda Meir has a very famous quote. She's an old prime minister that led them through some wars, and she had a very famous quote that if the Arab world put down their guns, there'd be peace. If Israel put down their guns, there'd be no Israel. And that's been adopted and used by the Ukrainian side. And Israel supports Ukraine. The PA supports Russia. Like, that is true. Like that, there's a massive connection. There's a big reason why Ukraine and Israel have that connection and why there's so much support there. And it's also the democratic values and all those things. At some point, though, Israel, it was different because Israel took so much land during the war. They took the Sinai Peninsula, they took the Golan Heights, they took a lot of land during the war. They had to trade that back for peace. That's where the difference comes in, where Ukraine, we'll see what happens, but they haven't taken land. They've had land taken from them. Some of it has been re-liberalized. But at some point, there's going to have to be a land exchange of some sort if there's going to be peace. And I don't know what that would look like, but there just will be. And if that's what it needs to come down to for people to stop dying, for Ukrainians to stop dying, for Russians to stop dying, and this isn't to excuse Putin or anything like that.
Yeah, sure.
That in my mind, that's what I want. And I'm not as much of an America First guy, but also if you are an America First person, I understand you don't want this money going to Ukraine. I get that. I get you don't want money going to Israel. Like if you're an America First person, I understand that completely.
For sure.
So I like his stance there. And honestly, what I like about him a lot, and I hate saying this, but I like about him a lot, is he's got a lot of Trump in him, where Trump is a warrior. And Bill Maher does a good job of explaining this.
Yep.
Trump's a soldier. Trump's a warrior. Like, I disagree with RFK on a lot of policy, but I find him to be extremely truthful. I don't think, in my interpretation of it, I should say, I don't think he's lying about anything he's saying. I truly think he believes it, whether he's right or wrong, which I think he's wrong a lot. But I think he believes everything he's saying. And he's willing to take these hits, obvious smears from the media. And I'll get into the 1488 one and why I find that to be a smear. Also why I find his COVID Jewish take to be such a smear against him.
Sure.
And then that's really where my expertise comes in, because I can't tell you about COVID at large. I can't tell you about nuclear at large. But I can talk about this. I know a lot about this. So here's finally over to this part. Let's talk about the two Jewish things he's done. I guess with three, but the third one's not as important. So first one was the COVID thing, where the New York Post secretly recorded him answering a question.
I saw it. You're talking about the ethnically targeted thing.
The ethnically targeted thing.
Yeah.
So first off, you're going to speak differently if you're on camera versus not on camera, and that's going to happen. Secondly, he claims, and I have no reason to not believe this guy, that they asked him a question specifically about the Jewish ethnic group being less at risk to COVID than blacks and whites and whatever. And I have no reason to think he's lying. And if he was lying, why not release the rest of the video? The only video that got released by New York Post was him answering the question. They didn't release the question. And obviously, this was obviously a setup. Like, obviously, if it's being recorded, like, clearly it's a setup. Also, that story about Jews being ethnically less at risk, that did circulate before. The only difference was Jews weren't the protagonists of the story. It was blacks, whites, and Hispanics. That was the protagonist of the story. It was, you can go back to 2020, 2021, 2022. Tons of stories about this. Jews weren't the protagonists. This is something that I don't know if I didn't know if it was true. I don't know, no idea if it's true.
Yeah.
But something that I thought, and a lot of my friends thought, is like, yeah, we are less at risk. Still got the vaccine. I'm still a pro-vaccine guy, but like, I still think everyone, minus maybe children, should have got the vaccine. And like, that's something that we all thought, not all of us, but a lot of Jews, like, we thought that already. It seems like an obvious, clear smear attack against him. I have no reason to doubt his sincerity when he's saying, hey, I was asked a question, which on Twitter, his team, there's articles about it now too. There's some media defending him, like, hey, this is what's going on. It was a clear smear attack. It clear as day in my mind. And then to the 1488 thing, that one I thought was strange because when I was first digging into it, and for anyone who doesn't know, he tweeted something that about socials, him getting security from the government while running, and how it usually takes 14 days for them to respawn. It took 88 days. To be honest, I didn't know the 88 thing. I read about the 88 thing afterwards, and I was like, okay, so 1488 is a thing. I'd heard about the 14 words and all that, but
yeah.
So I started looking into it, and the first thing I find is it did appear it was like 59 days, not 88, and I was like, oh, that's a weird lie. I 100% admit it's a weird lie. But then I look into his argument for it, and the media defending him, and they talk about how these talks started in April, and on May 1st, they had a serious phone discussion, and I haven't seen the document, but media and his own team do claim that there was a signature of this conversation happening with somebody in government on May 1st. That would be 88 days. But let's say it's not. Let's say it wasn't 88 days. I admit it's weird. It's a weird lie, if that is the lie.
Well, it's also worth noting that he may not be the one running his Twitter account. Not to cut you off, but keep going.
That's true. It is worth noting. It is definitely worth noting. I assume he's not. They do a lot of content on his Twitter account and a lot of articles and a lot of different things. I honestly assume he's not, but it's a weird lie. However, my big issue with it is the main attack is that he's a conspiracy theorist. And if you're calling this guy a Nazi or he's sympathizing with Nazis due to a tweet, that is the ultimate conspiracy theory. He's citing Berkeley, Johns Hopkins, FDA studies, and we're citing a tweet. Like, that's ridiculous. That's absolutely insane. I mean, it's not insane. It could be true. Conspiracy theories come true. Like, a handful, a portion, whatever percentage do. However, that is a conspiracy theory. It's nothing like that is the definition of reading into a tweet and reading into it all. The more I learn about this, the more I'm like, am I really the only one seeing this? Like, what am I missing? And those are the two things that I do have like the expertise on. And then he goes in this whole apology tour, which is the third thing, which is actually the biggest red flag because he does the apology tour with this very right-winged, I don't know if he's Orthodox, but very right-wing Jewish rabbi who I would describe as an extreme Zionist. So I think people that don't like Israel would just say he's a Zionist. This guy does, to my knowledge, he does want the full annexation of the West Bank. He does want all of Judea and Samaria, which is the indigenous homeland of Jews. He wants all of that back, which I disagree with. And he's doing this whole apology tour. It's the one topic where he won't really talk about. Like, he has the rabbi guy talk for him. And as a Jew who supports Israel, I'm like, dude, you're being exposed. This is the one thing, as far as Jews go, this is the one thing where I'm like, you are actually being exposed. I think the COVID thing was silly. I think the Nazi thing is silly. But you're so pro-Israel that you're not willing to talk about it. And your whole thing is you're willing to talk about stuff. that one's a bit sketch to me. That's the one thing I'm like, it kind of ruins the credibility for me, even as somebody who's quote unquote on that team.
Yeah, sure.
That's the one where I start to fall off a bit. But everything else, and that's definitely not 10,000 feet. It's more like maybe 1,000. But that's what I'm seeing. And in my mind, I do feel a bit alone on an island there. Saying that, do you have any responses to that?
So I can't get into the nuances of the allegory between the Israel-Palestine situation, but I think that I find that commentary interesting. So I'll be clear. I don't think he is a Nazi or a white supremacist. I think that either he or someone on his team are trying to signal to those people. And that's what I tweeted about when regarding his
to be clear, I wasn't talking about you.
Oh,
I was talking about the general.
Yeah, to be clear, also, I didn't think you were. I'm just kind of like framing this. So one of the things that I tweeted was I saw it as a signal, mainly due to the 56-day thing that we talked about. It seems very odd that they intentionally went out to put it to mention 88, and then you saw 14 end of sentence. 88 was basically the first number reference in the next sentence. They were close together. I know it seems a little conspiratorial, but it's worth noting that a lot of these dog whistles are supposed to be that way. They're supposed to have plausible deniability. So you go, okay, well, I mean, you're just crazy. I'm not actually doing it. When in reality, you look at the facts around the 56 days. And then you add one more fact on top of that, which we didn't really talk about with his tweet, which was that Mike Pence, Ron DeSantis, many of these people on the right that are major players in the primary and polling, really well, they don't have Secret Service protection. He was not qualified for Secret Service protection. He kind of misconstrued the way that process worked. Maybe when we get closer to the election and he gets a higher polling rate, I'm not exactly sure of all the nuances, but like even the major players on the right are not getting Secret Service protection. The only person on the right that's getting it is Trump because he's a former president. So you add all those three things together and I go, that was a weird tweet. Now, whether his staffer tweeted that, or he tweeted that, I don't know. I mean, there are people that say he's got some weird people working for him. Maybe that they were trying to help him out by throwing a dog whistle. Maybe it helps recruitment. I don't know. But you're right. It's probably not even worth litigating that tweet because a dog whistle is a dog whistle. We talk about the big picture. That's one of the things that I was hoping to talk about was his real policy stuff because we look at that on its face. Yeah, when you look at that on its face, like that, I can't endorse him as a candidate because he on record is against a lot of the things that I support. I think the most you had mentioned the tweet was one of the things. And then you mentioned Ukraine.
Yeah, Ukraine. I am curious to hear your personal perspective on that as well, not just about RFK.
Yeah, well, that's a big conversation.
I mean, we can do it at another point. But,
it's fine. Yeah. No, so the way that I see the whole situation in Ukraine is you may be right. The Ukrainian government may, in the future, have to make some sort of land concession in order to get Russia to leave, right? The problem I have with RFK is not that he's made that claim. That's, maybe the Ukrainian government needs to make a concession. The problem that I have with him on the whole Ukraine thing is that he said things like the Euromaidan protests in 2014 were a Western-backed coup. I don't know if he said that overtly, but he's basically said.
I actually haven't heard of this. If you want to dive down this a little bit.
Yeah, so this is the core of, I think, a lot of the narrative. This is the core of, I think, what a lot of people see as what really triggered this. So, like in 2014, the president Yanukovych of Ukraine was dealing with a situation where Ukraine was about to enter into a trade agreement with the European Union. And a lot of young people there, millennials, were, coming up. It was 2014, it was 10 years ago. A lot of young people saw that as an important moment for Ukraine because Ukraine was a former Soviet territory. Ukraine has been, suffered greatly under Soviet rule. Last 100 years has been very difficult for Ukraine, and they've always been aligned with that Soviet, the East, right? Mm-hmm. And in 2014, there was a moment where they were about to enter into a trade agreement and more closely integrate and align themselves with the EU. They saw a path to EU integration. They maybe saw potential, way down the road, path to being involved in NATO. And at the time, I mean, they still are an independent nation after the breakup of the Soviet Union. They were recognized internationally as an independent country. And so the president Yanukovych in 2014 was about to enter into this deal, and you know, late at night one night, something like near midnight, he came on TV and basically said, "I'm pulling out of this deal." It was like on the 11th hour, like, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to integrate with the EU. We're going to pull 180 and pull out of this. As soon as that happened, like that night, young people across the country and in Kyiv specifically, went to the streets in a massive uprising against the government. Mainly because, and again, there was a lot of this in Kyiv and on the western side. You see them a lot closer to the EU. There's a lot more integration. The young people, you know, I mean, you can imagine what it'd be like being a young person in Ukraine growing up and watching the Soviet Union collapse when you were a kid, and then seeing the prosperity of the EU and seeing the prosperity that capitalism can bring. I think any millennial or young person can look at that situation and go, okay, I can kind of understand, especially us in the West. Like, I can understand why you would say, why you would be very interested in being more aligned with the EU. So when that happened, this protest erupted across the country. And one of the things that I don't like the characterization of it being a coup is that, first and foremost, there were influences on both sides. As you can imagine, Ukraine is kind of like, they are torn between two great powers, right? They are the entry point into Russia. If you look geographically, Ukraine is an entry point into Russia. So like, if Russia doesn't have control of the territorial land in Ukraine, it makes it harder for them to defend their borders. And so it's strategically a very important territory for them to have control over, because it gives them the ability to, you know, because of the way that it's set up geographically, it shrinks the amount of space that they need to guard from.
No, I'm with you. And to go, not to cut you off here, but to go further into that point, when you look at Russia's, I should say, recent history, because one commenter came on and just said, well, you're not talking about in 862. I'm like, okay, you're right. My bad. But you look at Russia's more recent history, the past few hundred years, when it was Soviet Union and all of that, they won every war they've won. They've been invaded, and they've given land for blood, until eventually you just can't stand the winter. Your supply chain breaks down, which is, again, not to defend Putin, but you read people like George Friedman or Peter Zahn. A lot of people predicted this exact war would happen back in the 90s or in 2000s. Like, they predicted this was coming because of that exact reason. So,
well, and I think you're right. I mean, it is a strategically important position for Ukraine, or for Russia. Ukraine is. And, you know, Russia has no issue invading their neighbors. I mean, they invaded Georgia in 2008, and many countries, if you're going to go back to the 50s and the 60s, I mean, they've invaded like over a dozen countries since the 1940s. So, and all right on their border, right, to try to retain that block. But so I understand it's strategically important. So there have been investment in moving the Ukrainian government towards Russia from, you know, Russian political interests, just like the West has had the same incentive. But one of the things that I think I really don't like to hear, especially from people like RFK, is that it's a Western coup. That is that undermines the idea that these people have any sort of independent autonomy as a nation state. And it also kind of, you know, only shows one side of the picture there. Russia had a very significant interest in making sure that Yanukovych didn't proceed with that deal to integrate with the EU. Yet Yanukovych had the political mandate to do so. And so Russia was overturning the will of a sovereign people, or pushing for the will of a sovereign people to be overturned. And that happened in the middle of the night. There's a reason he went on the air at midnight to say it. It wasn't because he was up late, right? It was because he didn't want it to blow up. And just the organic and countrywide nature of the Euromaidan protests, the fact that they happened so quickly, so instantaneously, and so decentralized in so many different places, just to me, this is the, you know, Euromaidan was like the crying out of the next generation of Ukrainians that wanted their own nation, their own identity, and they wanted to align with the West. And strategic or not, right? Russia has no interest in, has no justification in invading or overturning that as a sovereign nation. They have the right to choose their own future, who they want to align with, who they want to trade with, and who they want to work with. If Russia wants them to be more aligned with them, they should create the environment for that to be the case, just like the EU has. So, you know, that's one of the things that I really don't like to hear from him, is that whole narrative that, like, oh, the West is just integrating, you know, creating coups to like screw over Russia. No, I think that with Euromaidan, it's a very clear example of a generation of Ukrainians wanting a national identity and wanting Western alignment. And Ukraine was never going to invade Russia. It's not going to happen. Ukraine's never threatened, not in recent years, threatened to invade Russia. They'd have no reason to do that. So they're fighting for their life, and Russia's fighting for geographic and strategic political advantages, and they're killing Ukrainians to that end. So I don't know, reflexively opposed to really anyone that I hear propagating that narrative. And I understand, again, to your point, sure, there might be territorial concessions to close the war. I don't think there should be, but there may be. That may be a requirement.
Yeah.
I don't think there should be. I think Ukraine deserves their entire territory, and I think that they could fight for that, actually, if they really, if things continue down the path they're going now. I mean, they could hold all their territorial claims. So I don't know, and that's an issue I have with RFK, and I hear him pushing. He makes it about peace. He frames everything about peace, but when he's talking about it, it's like, okay, Ukraine should give up everything, their territorial sovereignty, their national identity, the future of young people, because Russia's threatening to cause more harm if they don't. So I mean, it's the same thing for any war. It's like what I say if Russia invaded Alaska. Sure, we could have peace if we just gave him Alaska, but it would be at the cost of everyone in Alaska and in the United States. It wouldn't create an environment that'd be cohesive to peace, because where's he going next? He got Alaska, just walk right in there and take it, and everyone resigns. Sure, that's peace, but then the next war and the next war and the next war, that's where I think if you look at the macro environment, a strong Ukraine that is able to rebuff Russian advance, that is able to assert their national identity, that is able to hold on to their territorial claims. If that is able to be done, then it creates an environment where Russia looks and goes, wow, maybe I can't do what I did in Georgia and get away with it, right? Maybe I can't do what I did in Ukraine and get away with it. It creates an environment that's less likely to result in more war in the future. And so that's the whole, you've heard that's a macro strategic argument the West has against funding Ukraine. And I think that there is absolutely an argument to be made that we maybe should talk about how much we fund them. I don't think we should write a blank check to them by any means and just say, we're going to give you whatever you want. But I do think there is an argument strategically to say Ukraine asserting its territorial sovereignty and defending itself against Russian aggression is the peace. It will result in more peace in the macro environment rather than just giving up. That is also a big problem I have with RFK. But again, we're talking about nuance within the issues of this conspiracy theory about the 1488 or the Ukraine thing.
Yes.
Again, on its face, like RFK's policies, I'm just opposed to. So these things are just kind of icing on the cake for me, if that makes sense.
For sure. No, I understand the policy argument, because honestly, like I lean left center. I actually took a test last night to make sure I do. But it was right there. It was much more towards libertarian than it was authoritarian.
Did you do the political compass quiz?
Yeah, I think it was political compass.
Okay.
And I was just slightly left. I was slightly left, but I was definitely
like slightly right.
Yeah, no, I could. Yeah, it's funny that we have this. I think it's a great dynamic, honestly.
Yeah.
But I understand all that. Actually, I didn't know about the 2014 thing. So there were, again, there's things he says where I'm just like, yeah, I'm not with what you're saying there. It's definitely how Bill Maher describes Trump. It's definitely he's a fighter. He fights for what he believes in.
So that's interesting to me. And somebody who's on this center left, like I look at him, I get that actually. I get that vibe from him. Like he gives off this energy of kind of, it's like a populist kind of like going
it's
to
a little
war.
populist. It is a little, I will give you that.
I mean, I feel like that's actually the core, probably what it is. It's like this populist energy. It's like, we're going to fight these elites that are screwing us over, and I'm here to be your voice, and I can fix it if you just give me all the tools to fix it. That I actually see that, and I didn't mean to cut you off, but I see that. Please. I saw that with Trumpism, populism in general, as just really dangerous, because it feels unmoored to me. It feels like if we're going to build a political movement off principles and ideas, you wouldn't want somebody that creates boogeymen and tries to I guess I get why it's like emotionally appealing, but I don't know, as an individual, to like strip all that away and say, what are they actually doing? And I see with RFK, the same thing that concerned me with Trump. It's like watering down the truth to try to use information to like create boogeymen and enemies that we have to go fight. to use information in a way that kind of like bends the truth, but to like be the guy, like to basically say, look, I'm going to go fight these enemies and I need you to back me up in order to do so. And I think that the reality is so much more nuanced than that. I don't think there's just like one enemy. I don't think like the establishment even effectively describes really anything. And so like, I want to see somebody that can articulate political vision.
That's where I think a lot of the difference comes from is I do see an establishment. I see a pretty clear establishment actually. So actually, there's a comedian that has passed away, George Carlin. He talks about there's a big club and you're not in it, and there's I can't remember who wrote the book, but I think it's called the Red Line. I can't remember exactly what it's called actually, but it's basically talking about, hey, there's a line you get to, there's a group you get to, and all of a sudden your interest converge. And there doesn't need to be a conspiracy of, oh, we're all talking together. There's not like I'm not saying an Illuminati, but you understand your interest. You're a smart person. You understand your interest. And if you have all this money, you're probably a smart person, or at the very least surrounded by smart people.
Yeah.
And there just is an establishment like Big Pharma. I don't think Big Pharma is the worst thing on earth, but I think they're trying to get rich. And then the people in government who can go from inside government to on Big Pharma's boards. And then, you know, there's the, Sure. There's all these what's the big one? The big evil one everyone hates is the military industrial complex.
Yeah, for sure. The defense contractors.
Yeah, and like, I do see that. And I think you have to. I
do.
Yeah,
I do too.
Yeah.
I do too. I don't want you to think that I don't. I when I say that, I mean like they always describe the establishment or the deep state or as some other different group of people. But like, I think it's not a problem of individuals. It's a problem of systems. It's a problem of process, right? And so like, I'm not saying that there isn't an establishment. Like, you are right. Like in many cases, the regulators are run by the people that need to be regulated. That's a problem, right? Or in many cases, defense contractors are operating with no exposure and oversight in how they spend money, and they're wasting money and they just get a blank check. I mean, that's a big problem. But like, I don't see that as an issue of Hillary Clinton behind the scenes pulling all these puppet strings and we need to go fight her, or like this group of shadowy elites that like nobody knows, but they run everything. I see it as a systems issue. It's like, we need to have more oversight onto the way that we need to audit these organizations and figure out where the money's being wasted and what's causing the waste. We need to make sure that we maybe ban people from who are regulators from serving if they say have a business interest in doing. So like, I look at that and I say those problems can only be solved if you articulate a political, like a vision of how you solve those problems. But if you're telling me we need to go to war with a shadowy elite group of elites and I don't know who they are, but I just need to trust you that you're going to know who they are and go to war with them, then you create an environment where I just give you a blank check to go be a tyrant towards whatever person you decide you want to fight. And you're not articulating any solutions. Right. You're just kind of like going to war with something. And so I want to be clear, like, I agree with you. There is an establishment problem. There is a system that is broken. But if you can't articulate the processes that cause it to be broken, then I don't trust you as a politician. It's one of the reasons why I really love Justin Amash, like Congressman Justin Amash. If you ever looked into him, he's my favorite. He's by far my favorite politician that's ever served in Congress. And he actually left the GOP in 2020. And he was the first person to join the LP. And he is focused on process first. He's like, here are the things that we need to do to change the way Congress operates so that we can create an environment that creates more oversight rather than, oh, we need to just go to war with these people. It's like, no. You need to change these processes and procedures, which will lead to the results that you want. And again, not to talk over you, because I feel like I'm just rambling, but Forward, I think actually does an amazing job of this. Forward's focused not on going to war with the people that architected these terrible voting laws, like, because there are many of them, but they're focused on how can we introduce changes to the democratic process in such a way that reverses the incentives so that there's accountability, there's transparency, there's democracy, and those things. So like, the things that motivate me as a voter aren't the demagoguery or the let's go to war. It's like, what are you going to do to fix it? And if you can't tell me that in certain and clear terms, like tell me what your solutions are, then I just don't trust you. I feel like you're using this as an opportunity to go to war with your personal enemies or whatever. And I don't know, it's a scary prospect to me because I don't know what's going to happen on the other side. That's what we saw with Trump. It didn't result in anything positive. I mean, the deep state, the establishment, nothing changed there.
Yeah,
Trillions
as far as the
spending.
establishment goes, nothing changed with Trump.
Yeah.
I was a never Trumper in 2015, 2016. I mean, I was 20 years old, 21 maybe, but
yeah,
I hated the guy. Hated the guy. And I was coming from the left towards the center at the time. And but I will say he did in reflection, there were some good things about it, but the establishment, the dismantlement of the establishment was not one of them.
Everybody has a couple good things. I could say a couple good things about Trump for sure.
Of course. And I will say you have convinced me there where I can't think of many things where where RFK is like, hey, here's the detailed plan or anything like that. Okay, he will eat the things where I hear him talk about that I know very well myself, which again, Judaism, Israel, Palestine, and then something I haven't mentioned yet is finance. I'm a CPA. I love the stock market. I read a ton about it. I understand how these things work inside FINRA and the SEC and all these things. And when he talks about that, which isn't often at all, but when he talks about that, it's like, okay, you don't know what you're talking about. And there's a huge establishment problem inside the stock market. I'm an AMC investor and believer. I believe in this play first off, not financial advice to anybody, but also it's like part of the reason I chose this one was it's a real fight. And I think there's a chance, I think we will win, but I think there's a chance we win at the end of the day. And it's a real fight to expose corruption. And a ton of corruption has been exposed. When we first got into this fight, they told us naked shorts were fake. It didn't exist. Now it's openly accepted as fact.
Wall Street bets that. Oh my God, that whole story is awesome. Like we could do a whole episode.
It's incredible. And I think that part appeals. I'm projecting onto other people, but I guess for me, and I would assume for everyone that's like myself, like, well, this guy just appeals to me is where so many people just say, oh, he's a conspiracy theorist. And when I look into what he says, I'm like, I could see truth in that. And by the way, you called me a conspiracy theorist, and this is now openly accepted facts, like naked shorts, FTDs, like all these things inside the stock market, openly accepted facts now that you were trying to convince me, gaslight me, really didn't exist. And I think a lot of people see that in him. Also, I think he has more of a reason. Again, you have convinced me. Actually, you have convinced me of he doesn't really have detailed plans. That's a really big deal.
And it's actually like it's one of the things that I would just tell you, and I tell anyone in my audience. I teach my son this when he gets old enough to talk about these things. Just be concerned when somebody there's a problem and their first response is to go blame a person or an individual. I mean, I get it. There are times where that's the case, but in politics, especially with these big macro problems, these aren't really issues of having the wrong guy there. It's an issue of the system that put 100%. The guy there to begin with. And if we can't find politicians that are willing to address those challenges, then we're going to continue to look for a strong man to solve this problem. And you know how this goes. This is a pendulum. It's a tit for tat situation. It escalates. It escalates. It escalates. They get more power, then they give the next guy more power to go after the people that are the enemies on that side. And you go to the other side, and then the left is doing the same thing to the right. And all you end up is a situation where you have one God king that has all the power in the world to go fight the enemy. And all they do is just continue to consolidate around that. No problems get solved. We just find new enemies to hate. And so like that, I see the thing I hear about from a lot of our people that like RFK is they go, he says the stuff that I'm thinking. It's the same stuff I heard about Trump. Like he says the stuff that I'm thinking, and he will bring grains of truth there. Like that whole story about the polio vaccine, that was a real story. That actually did happen. But that doesn't mean that the polio vaccine is evil or that it was created to like give people polio, which is what he kind of twists it to mean. So he'll use a grain of truth. He'll create an enemy or a boogeyman, and then he'll tell you the narrative that he wants you to believe, and then then you're ready to go to war with him. And that I think is a dangerous political. It's just the nature of our environment. Nobody has solutions because, you know, this is. I don't know if you're directly involved in Florida. I remember you mentioning that, but like, I feel like that's a little bit.
Not super involved, but yeah, a little bit involved.
I just know that in the center right now, that's what I see. On both sides, I just see both people trying to find enemies. Give me the power to go fight the enemy, but nobody's really talking about solutions. So again, I'm repeating myself.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I would say the difference here is, Trump clearly aligned with a side. He clearly aligned with the right, and he went to go battle the left. Like that was the enemy he was going after. When he was saying establishment, he was saying drain the swamp, but there was one side of the swamp that he was talking about, and I wouldn't even say he was successful with
Well,
draining that side.
I would almost push back on that, Troy. And I just to throw this out there, Donald Trump was a huge departure. At least, so I think I'm about 5 years older than you, I gather, because you said you were 20 in 2016, and I was 18 in 2012. So I'm 30. So 2012, 2008, 2012 were like the first campaigns that I saw. The Republican Party in 2012 was not the same Republican Party that came out of the 2016 election, and Donald Trump went to war within his party. That's what he did. He went to war against people like Jeb Bush and people like he at least verbally, like he went to war against that establishment. He went to war against the left too, but he also radically transformed what the word Republican and conservative meant. He was a Democrat before he joined the Republican Party. He gave money to Nancy Pelosi. He was a massive Democratic donor. He was pro-choice. I mean, he was on the record being pro-choice. There's a lot of things that he said that were very left-leaning, and he really redefined the word. I think RFK is doing something similar.
So that's the thing, is that
I'm trying to, at least.
So that's fair. What you said is fair. I would still say by the end of it, I guess I should say by the end of it, it was Trump's on the right, and he's going to war with the left. I think by the end of it, and he did really redefine what it meant to be a conservative, completely, or Republican, whichever word you want to use there.
Yeah.
RFK isn't embraced by people on the left. People I know that don't like him, are on the left, and when he's going to war with the establishment, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a pendulum thing. It seems like he just wants to stop the pendulum. That's what it sounds like to me. And also, with Trump, there's no reason, going into his history and he's going through him as a person, there's no reason for him to hate the establishment. It's given him everything he has.
Yeah, right? That's right.
There was nobody on earth has more of a reason to hate the establishment than RFK. There's nobody on the planet. They killed his dad and his uncle, and that's not conspiracy. At this point, it's conspiracy to say they didn't.
I can't comment on that. I haven't even looked into the nuances.
So Breaking Points has a guy on there, does a good job. They actually their own monologues, they do a good job of talking about it too. The White House released some documents and then stopped and now refused to release the rest of them.
I have heard about that Joe Biden's delayed the release. I think I actually heard about it from RFK's Twitter, which I think on its face, because I don't know enough about the nuance, on its face, it definitely seems odd.
So at this point, I think
I don't think it's out of the question to say that, by the way.
I want to say objectively, but I guess I can't, if I'm being honest. But subjectively, it is way more of a conspiracy theory in my mind to say these guys had nothing to do with it than it is to say, hey, yeah, they obviously had something to do with it. Because in my mind, just the evidence that's out there, it seems like they had something to do with it. And if they did, or even if he thinks they did, there's nobody on the planet that is more against at least the faction of the quote unquote establishment that makes up the CIA and the FBI and that crew.
Yeah.
I see big important differences. Although I do agree with when the points you're bringing up, I think are true. And you have convinced me to an extent, for sure. And I also agree that it really does come down to policy. It comes down to systems, and that's why I am such a big forward guy. So I'm such a fan of yours. Is that's what we have to fix. We have to fix those things at the ground level and then move all the way up. As a figure, and I guess it really is like a figure type thing. I think I don't know exactly who I'd choose. I need to look into this Mosh guy.
Who I'd choose. He's not running for president. I don't think so, but he did run briefly in 2020. Actually, full disclosure, I was his delegate organizer for the Libertarian Party. I'm a huge fan of his, and I have been since 2012. So
cool. So real quick, I don't know who I would choose amongst all the people that could possibly be president. But amongst the candidates, there's no one that speaks to me more than RFK. And again, not even necessarily policy-wise. Again, I'm not a fan of the Green New Deal. I love nuclear energy. I don't think he is as knowledgeable as I would like inside the finance economic realm.
Sure.
I don't think he really has much knowledge of that at all, to be honest. But people like Jamie Dimon, who people want to run for president, and he gives a great pro-America speech. Jamie Dimon is one of the best pro-America speeches I've heard in a long time. That terrifies me. He's a banker. I don't trust any bankers after what I've learned over the last 4 years.
JP Morgan Chase guy.
Yes,
Yeah.
and like everything about
I wouldn't
his time,
vote for him
yeah,
either. No, there's
everything
no.
about his time. He's CEO at '05. Epstein becomes their number one client in '06. But like even beyond that, it's everything about they've gotten sued so many times, just like Goldman Sachs and Bank of America and all these things. Like everyone that I hear it brought up, Cornel West is another one. I don't know much about Cornel West, but I heard his Israel-Palestine stance, and it's awful. It's terrible. Like
Oh, he's
it's
a far left like a
yeah,
real socialist adjacent progressive, not a full blown.
yeah, and like that's what I hear. But
That's exactly the kind of person I would expect to challenge Joe Biden in a primary, right?
Yeah, no, and that's like I would if RFK doesn't exist, I see this going like a Bernie type figure being able to challenge. But there's no one else that speaks to me, and no one on the right. Ron DeSantis, I think, is an adult, but I can't stand a lot of his policy. I think he goes to war not with. I think he says he goes to war with the woke or the elect, as John McWhorter would call them. New York Times author John McWhorter. I think he's actually going to war with the LGBTQ at times instead
Yeah, no, I
of the
feel
elect.
for sure.
So there's no one else I see that I'm like, I want that person more than I want RFK. And although I admit you have brought up very valid points.
Well, I want to tell you, I feel, and not about specifically the same way about RK, but I feel about the level of despair. Maybe despair is the wrong word, but I have no one that is running for president. I mean, there are some libertarian candidates. Like I really like Chase Oliver, who's running for president of the Libertarian National Committee. I just think I have problems with the way the Libertarian Party operates. So I know he's probably going to get destroyed, even if he does get nominated, because he's got to answer for all this craziness. So I think that's a whole long shot. But if we're looking at the old parties, there's no one that I look at and I go, oh, I would support them. I mean, if I had to go today, and if it was anyone in those two primaries, I would just vote NOTA. I would like show up and write in NOTA. That's literally all I could do. So, I mean, if I had to hold my nose, I have no clue who I'd vote for. I'd probably just cut my nose off or something. But like, I legitimately am in the similar boat. There's very few people that I.
Let's talk about those candidates real quick in third party or people like Amash. I would love to look into other people into different policies. So real quick, if you want to mention some of those guys or gals.
Yeah, so there are a couple of candidates running for president in the Libertarian Party, which I mean, I would tell your audience to check out. I do think that these candidates are far better than what you're going to find on the left and the right. My concern, if we talked about in the last episode and this episode, is there's just a lot of discord right now in the Libertarian Party. So it's going to make really it's going to be hard for those people to get past the noise. So I hope somebody can break through and prove me wrong, by the way, but I see that frustration. It causes me a lot of stress. So three major candidates I think that are announced right now that I'd say to look into would be Chase Oliver. Chase Oliver actually ran for Senate. You might have heard it. He ran for Senate in Georgia in 2022. And he was the guy that threw it into a runoff. So he made national news, and he was, I think, interviewed by Vice and a couple other major publications to talk. And he articulated in very clear terms, I love Chase, his ability to talk about libertarian / classical liberal ideas in a way that makes sense to most people. He did a phenomenal job doing that when he ran for Senate. And so he's trying to take that energy and run for president. If he gets a nomination, I know he will do an amazing job of articulating those values, especially if he can find a way to wiggle out of this nonsense that we've seen from state affiliates. So that's one thing. That's one candidate. The other candidate that I think is worth noting is a guy by the name of Lars Mapstead. And Lars is a former tech entrepreneur who's made a lot of money creating. He created an app and a couple other things that went viral, like it went really massive in the early 2000s. So he's an independently wealthy guy. I like to describe him. He may not like to describe himself this way, but I kind of see him as an old school hippie. He's a very much live and let live kind of guy, but he's very principled, and he's very competent. He's very intelligent. And he's running for president as well. You can look him up online. His name's Lars Mapstead. His strategy is interesting, unique, I think, in a way, because he's focused less about going to win the LP nomination, like the entire presidency. He wants to is tactically focused on winning one or two states, enough to
I love it,
enough to split the electoral college and make it a kind of a moment of chaos and put yellow gold, I should say, on the map in a real way. And so he's got a strategy that he's spelled out about how he's going to do that, investing a lot of money into a couple key states to try to make an impact in a way that would be historic. So he's also a candidate that I think is worth checking out. I really like Lars a lot. And then the other one is a guy by the name of Mike Termott. Now, Mike Termott is a former police officer. I think he lives in Southern Florida. He is also just a very well-spoken, principled guy who's running for the nomination. I think those are the top three contenders right now. And he's interesting because he's got this personal experience of working and seeing the harms and effects of prohibition and the drug war in such a way that it's really changed his mindset on what prohibition should be. So like, that's a very libertarian model to be anti-prohibition and for the right of people to put whatever they want in their body. You can imagine a former police officer saw the harms of that firsthand. So I don't know. He's got interesting stories and he's a very well-spoken guy. So those are the three on the libertarian side. There are more candidates, but not many of them I think are kind of have a shot right now at getting the nomination. But I'd tell them to check them out for sure. And again, all of them are going to be better. Even if they get nominated, they would be better than the other two candidates. Assuming the LP can actually get its shit in order and solve some of these major problems that we talked about, they could legitimately provide an alternative on the ballot. So they will, at least in Tennessee.
I hope that happens. I think the strategy of getting one state is incredibly smart. I actually talked about this. This was so long ago. It was during the Trump-Hillary election. I'm in college. I go back home to my dad's for dinner, and we're talking politics. And I just kept saying, like, if we can get – see, I am my father's son, so I have to give all the context of the story. He was at that time trying to convince me, you need to vote. Like, it doesn't matter who you vote for. And I'm just like, what is the point? Like, what is the like? I'm very, and to this day, I still kind of hold sentiment to my point that younger Troy said, is that, like, you can't tell me I have freedom and I can do whatever I want and this country's so great and I agree with all that. They tell me I have to vote. And I think it's a better reflection. This is the argument being at the time. I think it's a better reflection of the system and of my opinion of the system, and it's a better reflection of my voice if I don't vote. And there's all these millions and millions of people who are not voting. It's showing how broken the system is, how stupid it is, and we hate it. And like, look at who we're voting between. And one of the things we end up talking about is, well, what if a third party person catches momentum and all of a sudden they're a famous name, and then 4 years down the road they can make a bigger fight, and then they can make a bigger fight 8 years to all of a sudden there's a third party or something. And so we talked about, well, what if a third party could win one state? Would you vote if they could win the state of Kansas? Like, if you thought that was at all sort of possible, well, I was voting at the time. That was one of his arguments for me. He's like, what if they just won Kansas? Don't you think that would be a big deal? And I was like, yeah, that would be a big deal. That would be a reason to vote. So I guess no matter who wins this election, assuming it's going to be Biden or Trump, but let's say it's RFK or DeSantis or whoever it may be, I guess my true hope for the election outcome is there is a piece of gold on that map. That would be, I think, an incredible thing for a decade from now. Or 12 years from now. I think it'd be an incredible, incredible thing.
No, I agree. One of the things that motivates me and really, and if I had to boil down what I really am passionate about just in the aggregate, I just really want to see the two-party system be challenged in a way that can actually change the status quo, because these people they're holding us hostage. They're writing the rules to enrich themselves and protect their own power, and they're getting in the way of those solutions that we discussed earlier that would actually create the competition of ideas needed within what you'd expect a democratic system in order to solve problems. They get in the way actively of solving problems because solving a problem doesn't help them get reelected, right?
100%.
So there's all these systematic problems, and I think the core of it is that this stranglehold the two-party system has on power. If you can introduce competition and inject it into that system, you will start seeing solutions come out of that system, because right now, the fact that they work together to fight any sort of opposition to that and protect the status quo is the reason why we have many of the problems that we have today. To your comment about not voting, though, I will say I personally am kind of on your dad's side in a way. Not like, I know that you said you
I am
voted
too now,
Yeah.
but
But I'm thinking, like, I wanted to say this. If everyone that felt the way that you did when you were younger, and I felt the same way too, showed up and just said NOTA, wrote in something, that would win. I mean, if we all wrote the same thing in, right? Or voted for, if you have the none of the above option, which many people have, that option would win. And that would be a really disruptive force. I think just showing up and not voting for them is actually more important than staying home. And it takes 10, 15 minutes, just show up, write something in, even if you think it's no chance of winning, because that vote shows them that there's an entire contingency of people here that are not being represented. And that's a signal. And in the state of Tennessee, where most of our races are uncontested, if there was a huge volume of people writing write-in campaigns, for example, and or at least voting for the alternative, voting independent, or just writing in NOTA, that would be disruptive. Like if everyone who stayed home decided not to stay home, that'd be disruptive. So I think it's important to vote, but I'm not saying you need to show up and vote for the lesser of two evils. I'm saying just show up and vote for something that you believe in.
So, that was the argument my dad put to me when I was 20 or whatever I was. I've loved this conversation. I just took a look at the clock and it's been an hour and 10.
Yeah.
So if you want, we can cut it off here, but you're always welcome. I will definitely be reaching out to have you back on a handful of months down the road and see how, was it LibertyCon or LiberalCon?
LibertyCon. And I would tell your audience to check it out. LibertyCon. I think it's libertycon.org. Make sure I think both of them go there, but yeah, LibertyCon.
I would check it out for sure.
I would say to pick up tickets. It's not actually, sorry, it's libertycon.com. I always forget there's one or the other. But here, libertycon.com. If you get tickets now, the price increases in 22 days. So you've got in the month of August to get a ticket. They are discounted, and there are some amazing people that are going to be there, like Justin Amash, for example, is actually just opted in, and many other politicians that are on our side of this kind of conversation. So I'd say to check it out if you're interested. Libertycon.com, not .org.
Libertycon.com. Definitely will. I appreciate your time. I'll let you get back to your work and your family, but until next time, sir, I will follow you on Twitter, and I'll be reaching out and be commenting in both X.
You'll follow me on X.
Man, that really does bother me, man.
You got to change your podcast name.
I know, but the good of X, just like I'm hoping that maybe this catches on as like a nostalgia thing now. I don't know. I haven't figured out the podcast name quite yet.
Yeah. Again, thanks for having me. I'm sure we'll talk in a couple months, man.
Of course. Until then, I'll be commenting in agreement and disagreement on your tweets, and I look forward to it, brother.
See you, brother.